Hello. Just getting set up here. Hello. Just getting set up here. Hello. Just getting set up here. So I'm gonna wait a few minutes for people to come in. I hope you've all been having a good week. I'm sure you've heard about our very drawn out election here. So things have been a little tense, but the week is drawing to a close now. Let's see. Oh, got 8 people. So I'll wait a little bit more, but I'll introduce myself. If you don't know me, I'm Shirley Gabber. I'm a master's student here at the University of Hawaii. I'm in my 2nd semester in the linguistics department with a focus on language documentation and conservation. I'm living on island, but I'm originally from New Jersey, so pretty far away and with not the best weather. All right, gonna wait a little bit more here. Oh, got some comments coming in. Okay. I think I might start. So today I'll be talking about data management and archiving, which is kind of a dry topic, but it's really important so that your data will be useful in the future. You spend so much time and energy collecting your data. Last week, Jacob gave his great presentation about video and audio recording. There's a lot of time that goes into that, a lot of work with language speakers. So it's really important that your data is well taken care of. So in this presentation, I'm going to first talk about why it's important to archive your data, what a language archive is, and then what data management is, why that's important, and some specific topics of data management like file naming, organizing your files, backing up and storing your files. And I'm also going to talk about an example workflow and some examples of archives where you might want to store your file. Okay, so first, what is a language archive? It's a place where you can store your language data, which is probably a digital file. A lot of archives now are only digital, so they will keep your digital files forever. So it's a place that you will store your data so that it lasts as long as possible, so that people in the future can also will also be able to use your recordings, use your data. And in order to archive your data, you do need to do a bit of preparation. You'll need to make metadata for your files, have a good file naming convention according to what the archive wants, and you'll also need to follow the archive's instructions so that you can properly store your data with the archive. So a little bit more about why archives are important. An archive will migrate your data to new formats when old ones go out of use. You've probably noticed that the way we store information now, it's always changing. I just got a new laptop and I can't even use it to read CDs or DVDs. And for older things like floppy disks or cassette tapes, I actually don't really remember floppy disks. I'm a little bit too young for that. But I remember some cassette tapes around the house from when I was little. And not only do things like that, they degrade over time, but the machines that you need to read them also go out of use. So if you leave your data on an old format and don't migrate it, then you can't even read the information that's on it after a while. So that's why one reason why archives are important. They'll make sure to migrate your data to a new format, and they'll back up your data for the long term. They have a long-term commitment, and that gives them an advantage over individuals, because individuals don't have usually as much expertise in data migration as a professional who works in an archive, and people eventually retire or pass away at some point. So an archive will be there for a long time and can keep your data safe, which is important not just for future linguists, but also for the descendants of the language community whose speakers are recorded in the archive. And it's also important for future human knowledge in general that data is stored properly for the long term in an archive. And one thing to note about archives is that your computer isn't an archive. Even if something seems safe on your computer can break or stop working, and the internet is also not an archive. Even if something is on the internet now, it might not be there next year or even tomorrow. So institutional archives are really, really important. So let's talk a little bit about data management. Data management covers a lot of things. So it's how you organize your work so that you understand what's going on and where everything is, and other people can also understand it. So things like organizing your files with folders, file naming and metadata are all parts of data management. And data management isn't something that you just do once and then it's done forever. You don't have to think about it. You should spend time whenever you get new data working on data management. And one thing that's recommended is to actually make a data management plan right at the start of your project before you've collected any data. So some things to think about are, how are you going to collect your data? How will it be organized? How will it be processed? And how will it be shared? And when you're making a data management plan, that's a good time to really think through all of the logistics of your project, any expenses that you might have. Think about possible legal and ethical concerns, like who will own the data, what level of access is ethical for this data. Is it sensitive data that should only be viewed by a few people? It's good to think about things like that at the beginning and make this like guidebook, this roadmap of a data management plan to guide you and your research partners in the research. And a little bit more about why data management is really important is that your data is very valuable and it needs to be carefully labeled so that other people and also you in the future can understand what's going on in that data. If you only have, for example, a sound file with no other information, no one will know what's there. So good data management makes your data discoverable, which means that people can find out that your data exists, and accessible, so other people can open it up and listen to it, see what's there. And I wrote ethically accessible there because it might not be ethical for the data to be accessible by anyone, to have open access. Maybe it should be restricted. But basically, without good metadata, no one will know that your data exists, which would be very, very sad. And you might think after you collect some data that you'll be able to remember where you took the recording, who's in it, things like that later. You might think you'll be able to remember exactly where you've stored all the files, but it's really hard to do that. I know sometimes at the end of a long day, I barely remember what I ate for breakfast in the morning. So it's important to write down the metadata as soon as possible. And remember that data management, although it's this dry topic, it's really important for the language documentation process. So at LDTC, we like to think of data in these 3 stages, like coffee. So the raw data, maybe the audio or video file that is straight off of the recorder. It's like the coffee berry. So it doesn't really look like coffee. It doesn't smell like coffee. It won't taste like a nice cup of coffee, but it's the raw ingredient. And in order to get your nice cup of coffee out of it, you need to process the data, like roasting or grinding the coffee beans. And ways that you might process the data are transcribing or translating it so other people will understand what they're looking at. And then the final stage, the data that's ready to be archived, is like the cup of coffee. It might be, the files might be trimmed and transcribed, and they're ready to be used and enjoyed by other people. So now let's get into a bit more nitty-gritty about metadata. So it's important to get as much information as possible about the speakers and the recording within reason. So some examples of things you might want to record are the location where you did the recording, what day it was, the names of the speakers and the topic, and you might want some more demographic information about the speakers, like where they were born, what languages they know, maybe they know a bunch of other languages. Information about their family members and their job might be important for understanding the content of the recording. Some of these questions might also be important if you are doing any sort of sociolinguistic study, and here we have a link to an example of some metadata that might be useful to collect. And then on to file naming. So a file naming convention is just a consistent pattern that you use to name all of your files. And different archives would require slightly different file naming conventions, but they often have an ISO code, and I think that Anna talked about ISO codes in her talk. So it's 3 letters that identify the language, and they're really important because there are some completely unrelated languages that happen to have the same name. So the ISO code would differentiate those languages so that it's easy to make it clear which language you're talking about. So we have a couple of lists of ISO codes here. I'll put up these slides after the talk. And I'd like to share this video with you guys with more tips about file naming. This is from the Archive of Indigenous Languages of Latin America, and I think it's pretty useful. It gives some pretty good tips. Let's see.
Hello! This tutorial is about file naming strategies for language documentation and archiving. In this video, you'll learn some file naming tips to help you organize your digital files and submit them to an archive. File names should be unique so that no 2 files have the same name. To make your file names unique, you can use sequential ordering, semantic naming, or a combination of these. In sequential order file naming, files get numbered in the order that they are created. Cameras and recording devices do this automatically, so this method might seem like the easiest one, but it does require that you track the descriptive metadata at the same time or soon after you create your files. Semantic file names encode some descriptive information relevant to your recording context. It is a best practice to use at least 3 relevant descriptors. Examples include language code, initials of speaker, date of recording or file creation, and short description of the content. Other relevant semantic information might include initials of the researcher, initials of the transcriber, location, or a version or part number. Here are some more helpful tips for naming your files. Keep in mind that some of these tips may not seem relevant to you or your workflow, but they are crucial to the workflows of the digital archive that will be preserving your files. Tip 1. Be brief. File names with more than 25 characters are problematic for some scripts or programs. Instead, abbreviate the name to a shorter but understandable version. Tip number 2. Pay attention to characters. Use only letters, numbers, dashes, and underscores in the file names. Do not use any special characters like parentheses, and avoid using characters with diacritics like accent marks and tildes. Tip 3. Do not use spaces in your file names. Spaces might interrupt or stop programs or scripts that the digital archive needs to run on the files. Instead of using spaces in your file names, use dashes, underscores, or camel case instead. Tip number 4. Do not use a period in a file name. Computer scripts will recognize the period as the symbol that introduces the file format type. Use a period only to set off the file format from the rest of the file name. Tip 5. Dates should follow the International Archival Standard. This format gives the year using 4 digits, followed by 2 digits for the month, followed by 2 digits for the day. For example, May 23rd, 1974 would be written as 1974-0523, with or without dashes. Tip 6. To maintain the correct order of numbered files, remember to use leading zeros in the file names. For example, 25 files in a series in which all other descriptors are the same will need to be numbered sequentially using leading zeros for the single-digit numbers. This will prevent files numbered in teams from being sorted before the file numbered 2. Tip 7. Be careful with files that have multiple versions. For multiple versions of the same file, do not use terms like final. Instead, distinguish the different versions with the letter V for version and the version number. And don't forget the leading zero. For example, if there are 2 versions of a map of Oaxaca, one should be named as version 1 and the other as version 2. Keep these tips in mind and you'll be an expert in naming files in no time. For more videos like this one, check out Isla's channel.
Alright, so those were, I think, some useful tips for file naming. And now I'm going to talk about the file naming convention that we use specifically at LDTC, at the Language Documentation Training Center. And we archive our data with Kaipuleohone, which is the digital language archive right here at the University of Hawaii. So our file naming convention is specific to that. So before our data is ready for archiving, when it's just the original raw data, this is the file naming convention that we use. So it starts with LDTC, and then we have the 3-letter ISO code for the language. We have a number, the number of the recording, and then an O for original. So you can see that there aren't any spaces in this file name. There's only one period right here before the extension. There aren't any special characters or any diacritics. And there are, however, some other types of information that could be useful to put in a file name that aren't here. It might be useful for you to write the date of the recording, or maybe the initials of the speakers or of the researchers. So there's lots of other options depending on what your needs are in your project and the archive that you are planning on depositing your data in. So this is what we have for the original files. And then when we process the data, like trim it or transcribe it, we add an identifier to the file name. So you can see that this file name, it doesn't have an O at the end, it says working. And it's helpful to use a different file name for files that you're processing, so that if you see it, you know what that file is, and other people that you're working with will also know that that's being processed. And just a reminder that you shouldn't be making changes to the original file. You should always make a copy of the file when you're going to process it, just in case you make a mistake and something happens, or you accidentally corrupt the file, which could happen really easily. If you still have the original file saved safely, then you know you're fine. And then finally, when we're ready to send the data to Kaipuleohone to be archived, then this would be the file name that we'd use, LDTC, the ISO code of the language, and the number. So there's no O or any extra labels. And here's a couple of examples, file names written with this scheme. So this is just one example of how of a consistent file naming strategy there were other examples in the video. If you name your files in a different way, or you have a file naming scheme that you'd like to implement in a project and you want to discuss it, feel free to write about it in the chat and we can talk about it. So file naming isn't the only thing you need to do to manage your data. You also need to keep track of metadata to give context to the recording, and so people can access what's there, to give information about what's going on and the situation. So we have a metadata sheet linked here with the metadata that we need when we're archiving in Kaipule-Ohone. Here's a little screenshot of it. So this is specific to Kaipule-Ohone, but there's, I'm sure, a lot of overlap with other archives. Things like the name of the file and what language it's in, the region where this was recorded, a description, who contributed to this file. These are all pretty basic things that you'd probably need for any archive. So take a look at this metadata sheet, and if you are working on any project during this webinar series that you would like us to archive with Kaipule-Ohone, definitely give it a look. So you'll need to write down this metadata. And after you get your recordings and you get the metadata, you also need to back up your data. So one way to back up your data is Google Drive. We have LDTC folder on Google Drive. If you'd like us to archive a project that you're working on, you can save it to this Google Drive folder first. Just when you're uploading the files, if there's two files with the same name, make sure to click Keep as a separate file. And I showed you a spreadsheet for taking down metadata, but I personally find those really big spreadsheets to be a little bit hard to navigate and a little bit hard on the eyes. So I've been using this software called Meta for a field methods class that I'm taking this term, and I've found it to be pretty useful and a little bit easier to work with for me. So it might be useful for you too. It's free if you're interested in getting it. So you would have different sessions for your project, and for each session you can keep track of any relevant metadata here, like a name for the file, who's in it. You can give more information about who the researchers and the speakers are and where they're from, description of the file, and also you can directly link this metadata to your files. So software like this could be a good way to stay organized, but there's also always basic spreadsheets too. And now a little bit more about organizing your files. I think this video is also from the Archive of the Indigenous Languages of Latin America, ILA, and I think it also is pretty helpful. So let's watch it.
Hello! This tutorial is about file arrangement methods for language documentation and archiving. In this video, we'll go over how you might arrange your files for deposit to an archive. Arrangement refers to how your digital files are organized, ordered, and grouped together in a digital environment, such as on a personal hard drive or in a digital archive. A digital archive can range in structure, from completely flat with no hierarchy to infinitely recursive with folders within folders within folders. Each repository will have its own structure and way of naming its units of organization. Though the terminology may differ, language archives often employ a three-tier structure, starting with a collection containing bundles, which contain the actual media files. A bundle is essentially the same thing as a folder on your computer, and these can be of mixed media or single media type. use mixed media bundles to keep together files derived from a single event. Here is an example where the mixed media bundles are based on single recording sessions. In this example, each bundle consists of an audio file, a video file, a transcription file, and a photograph. Single media bundles are more appropriate if data should be arranged around a specific protocol or theme, such as grouping recordings by culturally or grammatically relevant categories. Here, the bundle of audio recordings is based on a single theme, and all the media files are of the same type. Consider your own materials, and as always, work with your repository to find out what type of arrangement will work best for your deposit. The earlier, the better. For more videos like this one, check out Isla's channel.
All right, so I think those were some good tips about organizing your files. It's definitely very common to organize your files by session, but it's good to check with your archive, and like they said, the earlier the better. When you're making your data management plan, even at the beginning of your project, that's a great time to talk to the archive about how they'd like the files to be organized, and you could do that from the start. And remember to keep track of where your files are stored in your metadata. So now let's talk a little bit about data backup and storage. So there's unfortunately a lot of bad things that can happen to your data. Your hard drives could break, or there could be a power surge. There could be water damage or fire or insects or even mold. Your computer could be stolen or lost. The files could be overwritten. Something could be crushed. So with so many things that could happen to your valuable data, I think this little acronym is good to remember. LOCKS, lots of copies, keep stuff safe. So it's good to think about from the start, how will you make a lot of copies of your data and keep them safe? How will you redundantly back up your data? And one thing to think about is this 3-2-1 principle, that it's good to have at least 3 copies of your data on at least 2 types of storage media, with at least 1 offsite, so in a different location. So some examples of different types of storage media could be maybe different brands of hard drive, or you have a hard drive and a flash drive, or you have a hard drive and DVDs, a hard drive and cloud storage. Cloud storage can definitely be one of the ways in which you're backing up your data. I hope you're not getting all of that background noise from here. Sorry, my windows are open. So you can definitely use cloud storage, but one of the problems with cloud storage is that the companies that run it could always go out of business, and then your data might be lost. So it shouldn't be the only way that you're backing up your data. All right. So here's a workflow overview that we recommend. So this is one idea, but something slightly different might work better for you and your project. So it's always good, though, to start with making a data management plan. And before you make your recording, write down the key metadata. And then you don't want to just keep the recording on your recording device. You should move it to a computer. And you don't want to keep the file name that the file comes off of the recorder with either. You want to rename the file according to your file naming convention, and then you want to back up your data, preferably in multiple places, fill in more metadata, and then you process the data. Then you need to again back up the processed data, and finally you'll archive the data. And you might think about archiving as something that you would just do at the very end of your project, but it's definitely possible and encouraged to do progressive archiving. So you could talk to your archive about archiving throughout your project. That's definitely the safest way to archive in case something happens to your data. What you've had until that point would already be in an archive. So that is something to think about, and you can remember that just because your data is in an archive doesn't mean it has to be already accessible to a lot of people. So maybe you start archiving your data early, but it's only open to be viewed once it's all there, or something like that. So we've talked about why it's important to archive your data, but we haven't talked yet about specific language archives. So fortunately, there's a whole lot of endangered language archives, and we have a couple of lists here of language archives and a few examples here. So this is Kaipuleo-Hone. It's our archive at the University of Hawaii, and the one that the Language Documentation Training Center works with. You can see that a lot of archives have different regional focuses, so some archives might be more relevant for your project than others. You can always contact an archive if you might want to work with them. Archivists are friendly. They want to talk to you, and you can also talk to your local library or a cultural center. They would probably be able to help you find out where you should archive your data. And so there's still a little bit more to talk about. Even after you've decided where to archive your data, you need to think about what to archive. The file types you need to archive, because some file types are definitely better for the long term than others. So this video gives a nice explanation of that.
Hello. This tutorial is about sustainable file types for language documentation and archiving. In this video, you'll learn some tips for choosing appropriate file types when depositing materials to an archive. Archiving is a way of preserving data for the future. When collecting your data, you want to save media files that will be accessible many years from now, regardless of future technological changes. Your repository will likely have guidelines or suggestions for the types of files they can accept or support, but we'll go over general guidelines for collecting and depositing digitally sustainable media files. File formats can be proprietary or open. Proprietary formats are formats designed to only be opened by particular types of software or hardware. That's great for giving the developers of these formats and softwares control over their technology, but not so great for sharing materials, especially in an archival setting. Those specific programs may also become obsolete in the future if they become abandoned by their developers, since no one else knows their code. And it may become difficult for the archive to make obsolete formats usable in the future. Open source formats are file types that are not controlled by one specific developer or software company, so they can be opened by both proprietary and open source software. Open source software code is publicly accessible, so if one developer stops working on it, another can continue with all the necessary information. They're less likely to become obsolete. Think of it this way. Imagine you found an old floppy disk that might have some important data on it. You might not have the technology immediately available to get that data because that format is obsolete. It works similarly with digital files. For example, say you have a presentation in Keynote or Microsoft PowerPoint, both of which are proprietary formats. You might end up with a message like this. Before you send your presentation documents to your archive, you should save it as an archivable PDF to preserve the content in a more sustainable format. Lossless. Unless there are space issues, you will archive the uncompressed, lossless versions of media files so they are preserved in their original quality. Some repositories host or create derivative files for distribution purposes as well. However, especially when it comes to video, Always check with your archive to see what formats they can accept. Unencrypted. Encryption is a process of converting data into a form that can only be accessed by authorized users. This can include password-protected zip files, as well as digital rights managed or DRM content. Encrypted data cannot be archived. Only archived data that can be opened without specialized programs or digital permissions. While you may not be able to use encryption to protect your files, many archives do have the ability to restrict access to sensitive materials. Unstructured. At this time, most repositories cannot archive interactive data that is not self-contained in a single media file. A database might not be archivable, but the tables that comprise it would be. Similarly, a searchable online dictionary might not be archivable, but a PDF-A of the terms of their meanings would be. Non-executable. Executable data with executable code should not be archived in a digital language archive or institutional repository, unless the repository specifically says so, such as in version control repositories like GitHub. Executables could harm the digital repository that is preserving your materials. As always, work with your repository to find out about their file format restrictions. If you make sure your files are open, lossless, unencrypted, unstructured, and non-executable, you should be in great shape to deposit to an archive. For more videos like this one, check out Isla's channel.
Okay, so I think the biggest thing to remember from that is you should archive open file formats, not proprietary, and archive in lossless file formats. But definitely this is also something that you could talk about more in depth with a specific archive. So, all right, this is getting to the end of my presentation. These are the sources that I used, and this second one, the MIT Open Handbook of Linguistic Data Management. It has a lot of really useful information on data management for linguistics, of course, and it's not published yet, but when it's published next year, it's going to be openly available. So I'll definitely give a link to it on the Facebook page next year when it's published, because it will be open access, and I think it will be really, really useful to people. Here are a few relevant readings about archiving and data management. There's links on the slides if you want to read more about these topics. I'd recommend these. And next Friday, Margaret Ransell Green is going to be talking about phonology and orthography, the basics of analyzing the sound systems of languages and writing systems. So be sure to come back for that, and thank you for listening to my presentation. If you have any questions, I'm going to look at the chat now, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. And I have some questions here for you guys. If you want to tell me about your experience with data management, challenges that you've had, if you've had problems organizing your data, and what file naming schemes you've used, we could definitely talk about those. So I'm gonna check the comments in the chat now. Let's see. Yeah, I'm glad you guys like the LOX acronym. Oh, and also I'm glad that you couldn't hear the background noise. There always seems to be something going on over here. And yeah, the Isla channel also has some other videos on relating topics. I definitely recommend checking it out. I think it's much more fun when you're talking about data management if you have cute animated characters explaining it to you. Okay. Let's see. I have a question asking if SIMD Maker is a good choice for everyone. I'm actually not very familiar with SIMD Maker myself. So I see that it's a metadata tool from SOAS. Amanda, maybe if you could give a little bit more information about SIMD Maker in the chat. Have you used it? I haven't used it myself, so I don't think that I can really speak much about it, but if anyone else is familiar with SIMD Maker, definitely I'd like to know more about it. So please write in the chat then. This was the first Facebook webinar I've ever given, so I was kind of nervous. But yeah, if you have more questions, I'm gonna hang out here for a bit. Okay, I have a question from Yumi. So you have recordings on voice memo on your iPhone, and the recordings show the timestamp but don't play. I actually don't have an iPhone. I'm a weird person who has Android, so I have never used voice memo. But after this presentation, I'm going to look that up and see if I can find anything online about voice memo. Has anyone else here used voice memo? Have any of you guys had this problem? Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know much about this specifically. I wonder if you would maybe try to open up those recordings somewhere else. If they're not playing when you play them on your phone, I wonder if you maybe email them to yourself and open them up on a computer, if that would help. It's hard to know if it's a problem with your phone or with the application where the problem is. Okay, question from Ha'a. If there's a cost to store data in certain archives, that's also a good question. I think it probably depends on the archive. I actually, although I've been reading a lot about archives, I haven't archived much data myself yet. So I will be getting back to you on that. Yeah, that's a good point, Krishna, that there's the basic principles to data management and then the specifics depend on the project. And so Amanda, you were using the software from ELAR. That does sound useful. I think I found out about Lameda because one of my professors here is working on, is part of the team that's developing it. And thank you for giving the link to SIMD Maker. I will definitely check it out myself also. Okay, so I think I'll wait a few more minutes and see if I have any more questions. And I have a question from Karen Hiostia Shia Sky, asking about starting an archive and the safest way to store data for professional archives. That's also a very good question. I will also be getting back to you on this. I'm really sorry that I haven't been able to properly answer a lot of your questions right now. But if you want to start your own archive, I don't know very much about that, and I don't want to give you any wrong information. So I'm going to ask my professor who works with Kaipule Ohone here, who knows much more than I do about archives. So I will definitely be getting back to you on your question about backups for starting an archive. That is a really good question. Oh, Anna, that's a really good story about why you want to have good metadata from the start. Yeah. Um, well, I hope that all of those old recordings that you had to listen to were interesting. And I have a question from J. Stephen Medias. Say you have a team of research assistants and/or enumerators. How long should training be given to them so that they have the data management and archiving best practices before they go out to the field and post-field data collection? That's also a good question. I don't think that there's really a specific number that I can give because it really depends on the specific project. What kinds of data collection you're planning to do in your project, how you are planning to manage the data and also the resources that you have to spend time on training. But I think that if you make a data management plan and you have a solid idea of what tasks you and your team will need to be doing, then depending on that, once you have it all planned out, I think you should be able to figure out what amount of training is appropriate. I'm sure it will also depend on the background experience of your research assistants. If they haven't done anything like this before, I'm sure that they might need more training. So I'm sorry I don't have a specific answer, but yeah, it depends. Oh, I'm glad that you liked this webinar session. I forgot to mention earlier, but I put a Creative Commons license on each webinar slide, so you can feel free to reuse them. You should cite this when you reuse this, and also you can't use this for any commercial activity, but definitely for educational purposes, feel free to use these slides and the information on them if they're useful to you. Okay, so I'm just gonna wait a couple more minutes. So a reminder that next week, Margaret is going to be talking about sound systems and writing systems, phonology and orthography. I'm sure there's a lot of you who are interested in maybe making a writing system for your language, so that webinar session will be really helpful for that. I have a question from Nathan on how to get training in archiving practices. So what I would recommend is to do reading on this topic. I gave a few readings in one of the last slides, which I think would be a good start, and you could definitely ask your professors and say that you want to learn more about archiving. I'm sure your professors have probably done research and archived it, and they could tell you a lot and tell you about how to learn more. The noise of my teaspoon, it's actually this tea, what's the word for it? Not a strainer, but yeah, it's very loud. It's the kind of background noise you don't want in your audio recordings. It sounds like library science. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good, that's true. So you could definitely take some courses in library science. That's a good point. guess where I did my undergrad, we didn't have any classes in library science. But if there are classes in that are available to you, that would definitely be a great thing to explore. All right, so it's 5 p.m. here now, and I don't seem to have any more questions right now. If you do think of more questions later, you can definitely ask on the Facebook page, or you can email me, and I will get back to you. So thank you guys for your attention, and we'll see you next week with Margaret's presentation on phonology and orthography.